Story 1. I live next to the guy that called the city on all his neighbors weekly. I bet he remembers this. My wife, 22F at the time, and I, 26M at the time, shopped for a home in 2016 before things got too crazy, and we found a small place in a working-class neighborhood. We were working on getting the property approved for the FHA loan, and in the meantime, the seller allowed us to stay there so we could start fixing up the place. It was quite the fixer-upper, but we were young and the prospect of sweat equity was exciting. We were surprised that the house was so inexpensive until we got to know our next-door neighbor. Devin was somewhat famous in the neighborhood for finding reasons to call the city over infractions. For example, he would go out at night and measure the distance tires were from the curb. He filled noise complaints all the time and would intimidate folks on the street with threatening letters. Most memorably, Devin would actually regularly heckle the previous black tenants of the property we were buying from the safety of his elevated backyard. It was on a bit of a hill. What made the property we were buying difficult to qualify for the FHA loan was that the detached garage in the backyard had a sloping roof. The structure was at least 70 years old and was in disrepair. The seller paid to have it torn down, however. This only revealed that one of the walls of the structure was the retaining wall for a huge section of Devin's backyard. The 8-foot retaining wall was in bad shape. It leaned in towards my side by nearly 18 inches at the top from the bottom. It looked like it wouldn't take much to fall over and presented itself as a hazard. With permission from the seller, I tore down the retaining wall with the intent of replacing it myself, at my own cost. This opened us up to a barrage of creepy, threatening, cryptic letters from Devin. He was going to sue, we had to have an engineer approve of everything, etc., etc. He called the city almost every day. He insisted that we pay for everything despite the fact that it was the roots on his side that were pushing into my property. The code enforcement worker privately agreed with my assessment but seemed cowed by Devin's daily calls. Anyway, I decided that I was done dealing with Devin. It was too stressful. I didn't even own the place, I was the buyer and the loan wouldn't get approved anyway due to the issue. Neither the seller nor Devin were willing to pay for a new wall and I knew that anything I built wouldn't be good enough for Devin anyway. Before my wife and I gave up and moved out, I hacked a bit at the roots that were the last thing holding Devin's yard in from falling 8 feet down. They were overhanging my side of the property, after all, so I would have had to cut them down before building a replacement retaining wall. My guess is that Devin ended up losing about a fourth of his backyard and his fence over the next couple of months to erosion. Story 2. Bully me at the bus stop? You can stop getting on the bus, then. This happened well over 10 years ago, but every so often, I remember it and smile because it's a nice memory to me, no matter how fuzzy the details are. A bit of backstory. I went to a school that was over 3.5 miles from my house since it was the only school with a gifted program. I think my mom didn't drive me to school because of her job at the time, but there was a bus stop to get to my school at the other school that was a little under a mile from my house. So, every morning, she would get me ready, and then we'd get in her car and drive to the bus stop. I'd get out to wait for the bus, and she'd leave when the bus came. Here's where the story starts, finally. At the time of this story, probably 2nd grade, I was on horrible terms with a girl in my class. I forget who bullied who, but eventually, we made up. Enter her older brother and his friend. I think they were in 6th grade. I remember them being significantly taller than me. I have no idea why, but one day, they decided that every day at the bus stop while we were waiting for the bus or our rides, they were going to bully me. It started out kinda of small, calling me names regarding my weight, calling me weird, etc. I've always been obese, I'll admit it. I was also autistic, but I wouldn't be diagnosed for a few more years, despite my mom fighting for a diagnosis since I was in any sort of schooling. What they said hurt me, but I never showed it. And then it escalated. It had probably been a few months by this point, and they hadn't stopped the bullying. It was another afternoon, and I was waiting for my mom, trying to ignore them, smashing berries from the bush beside the school doors with my fingers. I don't know what sparked it, but I heard laughing as the brother of the girl I previously had issues with grabbed onto one of the pillars, and pretended as if he was being sucked in by something. That something was me. He said, she has her own gravitational pull, and some other things that implied I was as big as a planet. His friend had joined in at this point. I tried to hold it together, but I couldn't. I cried in silence. And when my mom pulled up and I got in the car, she asked me what was wrong, and I completely broke. I explained through sobs that the boys who were still at the bus stop were bullying me, and I like to imagine that this made my mom see red. Things are a bit fuzzy from here, but I believe my mom called the bus garage and bus coordinator person, told them the situation, and a few days later, the boys stopped showing up at the bus stop. I forget who told me, but I found out that she had managed to get them kicked off the bus for the rest of the year. From then on, I looked up to my mom more than I had before, and I felt so much closer to her. Story 3. We'll have that table, thanks. This happened in the mid-1980s. A group of 5 of us had been drinking a few beers at a pub on the outskirts of a biggish Australian city. It was usual for us to have a few at the pub, which was cheaper than heading straight into a nightclub. And around 10 p.m, we got organized, ordered a taxi to head into the city and go to a nightclub with plans to meet a bunch of mates out the front. Now 10 p.m. on a Friday night, getting a taxi can be pretty hard work. But as we walked over to what we thought was our cab, a bunch of people piled into it and the taxi took off, leaving us behind. We were pretty sure that was our taxi. The same company and the operator had given us the cab number, which matched. We ended up flagging down another taxi about 30 minutes later. As you can guess, we were pretty grumpy. We met our friends at the nightclub in town and got in line to get into the nightclub. When we got inside, again, about 30 minutes later, discovered to our surprise that the group who stole our taxi was sitting at a table. They were oblivious to us, of course. They didn't know who we were. But we knew them. The nightclub was standing room only and we were really keen to get a table. The other thing worth noting is that nightclubs in those days weren't really strict on checking age. You needed to be 18, but women especially were almost never checked. Our friend, Mark, who was a year or 2 older than us and an assistant bank branch manager, said he would sort a table for us. Mark has a very well-developed, neat red beard and hair, so he looks a lot older than he is, which was about 20 years old at the time. He was still dressed for work, so was in his suit. He walked over to the table of the taxi thieves, pulled out his wallet, flashed it briefly, and introduced himself as Detective Senior Constable Mark Smith. If you do not possess ID proving that you are over 18, you've got 5 minutes to get out of here. The effect was instantaneous. Eyes went like saucers, and 4 of the group of about 6 or 7 pretty much left straight away, followed by their appropriately aged friends. Mark immediately snaffled the table, and we all piled in. The 2 or 3 older guys saw Mark and us and came back to accuse us of something or other, but as I pointed out to them, "You stole our taxi, we stole your table." Story 4. Deny my ability to use my backyard when my dog is dying? Alright, you'll no longer be able to enjoy yours. A couple months ago our lovely older pit bull was fighting cancer, and we had the painful decision to have her put down. She was low on energy at this point, moving was difficult, and getting her to eat was getting near impossible. With that, one of the only things we wanted to give her was one last day outside in the backyard. So, the day before she was to be put to sleep, in the early morning I set out to set up a tent in our backyard and filled it inside and outside with things our dog absolutely loved. I noticed as I was setting things up, the neighbor behind us was placing sticks and leaves in their fire pit. Normally, I wouldn't care at all, but the poor dog is having trouble breathing at this point. I figured it wouldn't be an imposition to let them know my current situation and asked if they could postpone the burning just for today. The wife let me know that they are just going to be burning a few things to clear their yard and it won't last very long at all, and she gave me some level of understanding about the dog. With that, she lit up the fire and the smoke billowed into my backyard. For some context, the neighbor is directly behind my property. I have about a 100-foot x 100-foot backyard and theirs is about 50-foot length x 100 feet wide. Just to add this, I don't mind if people are burning things around me, I am not particularly fond of it, but if it makes them happy, that makes me happy. A few hours go by, I notice they are still outside adding more things to the fire. I approach and ask them kindly for an ETA, trying to be as patient and understanding as possible. They say they are almost done. A few hours later there is a raging fire outside and I can visibly see the husband outside pointing at my home, yelling, and then adding actual campfire logs, no longer leaves and sticks. At this moment, I'm not angry, I am just very sad. The poor dog isn't going to have the last day we wanted to give her. We would take her somewhere else, but don't want to stress her, so we spend the rest of the day inside. Later that night, around 9 p.m. as the sun is setting, I go out for a walk and notice the damn fire is still roaring. Mind you, as it was most of the time, with no one there. At this moment I am now pissed off and start looking into state laws, city laws, and everything in between. From this, I found out that my city has an ordinance that clearly states a fire pit cannot be within 50 feet of a structure. I could, if I wanted, to contact the city, and have it stopped simply because no matter where they place it in their backyard it will be within 50 feet of their home. But, that seems non-permanent enough. I was already considering getting a fence installed and already had multiple quotes. It was hard to swallow a bill for $15,000. But within 24 hours of this situation, guess what I paid for? The fence will be installed within the next couple of weeks around the edge of my property, and their fire pit is no further away than 10 feet from my fence. Can't take a single day away from your fire pit for a dying dog? Well, enjoy never using it ever again. Story 5. Want us to carry the project? Have fun getting embarrassed in class. Final year of university, I'm in a literature class I really need to pass with flying colors. The time comes to do group projects, and imagine my dismay when the girl I affectionately refer to as Airhead is in our group. Airhead spent most of her tutorial lessons on her laptop adding clothes to her wish list, and whenever questioned about something, would say, I don't know. In a very cutesy way to suggest she could get off the hook. When we did writing homework, she copied and pasted hers from fanfiction websites. We get given quite a big book to study, and I'm very sure Airhead isn't going to read it. In our group meeting, she pretty much says, I'm terrible at group stuff, I'm gonna let you lead and do a lot of the creative work. Just let me do what the book's definition is, and you can talk about the themes. I know Airhead is going to just get a synopsis of the book from somewhere, and sure enough, when she sends through the details, it matches a book review on the first result of Google, nothing changed. Feeling petty because I need those grades and work damn hard, I hit up my English tutor who had been starting to lump me and Airhead together, assuming I was also lazy. I let him know that Airhead was using stolen material, hadn't read the book at all, and could me and my other group members be marked separately. Delightedly, he agreed. On the day of the presentation, Airhead introduced the book and my teacher listened to her massively stolen speech. Afterward, just before she passes the info on to me, he suddenly begins to quiz her on the book. On the messages. On the theme. On the side characters. Watching her face change as she at first looked to me to answer it and then the teacher looked to her to make sure she was answering it was priceless. Airhead later lamented to me she had no idea why she failed the class when the rest of us passed. Do you have any interesting petty revenge stories? Put them down in the comments below. Like and subscribe and I'll see you all in the next video.